6,210 days. That's how long it's been since that Tuesday in 2001 on September 11th to this Tuesday, September 11th, 2018. Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott, and today I'd like to talk on the 17th anniversary of the attacks. Not so much about the attacks themselves, but about what's happened to the country since then and the effect it's had on us and where it might be influencing us in the future. Gentlemen, I just finished a really, really interesting book called The Revenge of Geography by Robert Kaplan. It talks about the ancient threads that have basically moved through world history, and he says so many times, actually becomes quite redundant, that geography does not make history, people make history, but the geography is a tide that pulls everything in certain directions and so on. And one of the things I'd like to talk to you about is this. He had supported the Iraq invasion, and so did I, and so do I still. In the course of this book, he mentions many times it was a tremendous blunder, and some big thinkers wonder whether the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan has doomed America. He doesn't think so. But his entire point was, instead of going over there and fixing Iraq and Afghanistan, we should have been fixing Mexico. But Mexico didn't fly any planes into our buildings, you know. So, Scott, we look back on all this, you know, it's hard to believe that things like, you know, an inconvenient truth happened 4 years after 9/11, and I certainly remember the days of having people putting mirrors underneath my car driving onto movie studio lots and no airplanes in the sky and so on. We thought we might be fighting in the American heartland, you know, in malls, and that these terror attacks were going to keep coming, and they didn't, not one of them. Not for lack of trying, as it turns out. I have a friend who's an FBI agent, and in the course of a single day, he usually gets a text or two about somebody on a jet airplane ranting and raving, trying to open the door and you know, and screaming Allahu Akbar and all the rest of it. Did you think we would be as successful as we have been in terms of preventing anything like the scale of 9/11 17 years after the fact?
No, and I think it was such an outside of our experience event that all of a sudden, when that happened, and you know, those of us of a certain age can remember this clearly, you saw those towers fall, you saw the Pentagon get hit with essentially a gigantic missile, and you suddenly thought to yourself, what else is possible? Like, it had never entered my mind that somebody could use jets as missiles to take down huge buildings. And it just kind of opened up a scary wormhole where you went, holy cow, we didn't see this coming. What else could be coming? And so in a way, yeah, you're right, Bill. The enduring legacy of 9/11 is the fact that we've not had another 9/11.
Precisely correct.
That is probably the most shocking thing about it, is that we have gone this far and managed to keep this terrible group of people at arm's length, at least from the continental United States. That has been a great blessing. It has been through not only the work of a lot of behind-the-scenes people who are heading off threats before we even know about them, but also because of the work of average Americans who have finally, you know, come out of their shells and raised their antennas and realized that you need a little situational awareness when you are anywhere in public. It used to be a fairly common thing, you know, if you lived in the Old West, so to speak, you were always aware of who was around you. Now we're, I think, more aware of who's around us. So that, I think, is the overwhelming feeling that I get on this anniversary. However, as far as the geography of these events and the historical nature of the alliances and the partitionings and the separating and pushing together people in different countries, I'm reminded of Jordan Peterson, who basically says that if you can read the history of the Third Reich and think that you would not have been one of them, then you are misreading history. And
Yeah, that's a great point.
I think by the same token, if you read this history of what decisions that were made by people from Winston Churchill on down about where boundaries should go and who should live where, and you look at that as if you could just observe it from afar and say, well, I certainly wouldn't have done that. That was just setting us up for disaster. You're full of it. You would have done exactly that. And in fact, it may have been the best possible solution despite what we have seen in the aftermath.
Steve, this book, as I say, it was written by somebody who supported both Iraq and Afghanistan actions, so it doesn't have the scalding tone, that you might expect from somebody, but it definitely does refer to them both as catastrophes.
That's never been Kaplan. I've been reading his stuff probably since the mid-'90s, and he's a level-headed, smart guy who knows his history.
I wouldn't be talking about him if he wasn't brilliant, and I don't mean that as a criticism of the book at all.
Oh, no, that's not how I took it. I'm sorry.
No, but my question to you is, since those attacks certainly were the trigger for both the action in Afghanistan and Iraq, for reasons that I might get to in a minute, do you think that those were historic blunders? Do you think that they were worth it? We have enough time behind us now, I think, even from the close of the Iraq War's, heinous deaths that we were seeing in 2005, 6, and 7. By the time George Bush left Iraq, there were, I think, 6 months without an American fatality there. Do you think all this stuff was worth it, or do you think all this stuff was stepping in a cow pie because we were so hot-headed we didn't know what we were doing?
You made me think of a story that probably isn't actually true, but Henry Kissinger was supposedly meeting with, what's his name, one of Mao's henchmen during the U.S.-Soviet or U.S.-Chinese rapprochement under Nixon, where Kissinger supposedly asked him whether he thought the French Revolution had been a success, and so I think it was Zhou Enlai replied, "It is too soon to tell." And, this, of course, is 190 years after the French Revolution. And it may be that it is still too soon to tell, Bill. What 9/11 did, especially over the course of about the last 14, 15 years, is expose the strength of the American people and the weakness, the turpitude, the vacillation. There's so many words I want to use of our leadership. The American people didn't respond in all the ways that our leadership was afraid we would. There was never any huge backlash against innocent Muslims. We didn't nuke Mecca.
Of all the things that have happened since 9/11, that is the thing that I think we should be most proud of, actually.
Oh, absolutely, because we are a good people. We saw those towers fall, and as Scott said, we steeled our resolve to do what had to be done in Afghanistan, but we did not just randomly lash out and nuke 300 million people like somebody in anger might have done, just taking out the Middle East.
I certainly wanted to.
Oh,
on
yeah,
that particular evening, I remember very well.
That's why I'll never run for president. You don't want my finger anywhere near that button. It's just bad news. But what we found is, and I too was in favor of the initial action in Afghanistan and in favor of the Iraq War. But what we found is, what's been exposed is that our leadership lacks any sort of strategic vision. Afghanistan, where there's never been a country, and there probably never will be a country, is the place where we have devoted this unending stream of men and women and resources and money and all the rest, trying to force nationhood on a spot which isn't a nation. It's just it's a hole. Afghanistan is a hole on the map where other countries aren't, and we're never going to change that. But due to purely domestic politics, mostly because Democrats are evil, we've got the situation where nobody can get us out of Afghanistan, and it's just wrong. Bush was wrong to sink us so deeply into there throughout his term. Obama ramped it way up for no good reason, and now if Trump were to pull out the last of our guys, they just slaughter him for it politically. And then there's a situation in Iraq. One of the things I argued for in the run-up to the Iraq War was I said, listen, if we do this, it's going to be a 50-year commitment minimum.
That's precisely correct.
But
Yes.
but I believed that the events of 9/11 were so horrific that we had it in us as a people to make that commitment, to make a real nation out of Iraq, a real beacon for the people of the Middle East, because there's a sickness and a part of the culture over there that needs fixing, and we had it within our hands to be that medicine. And instead we threw it away, again, over petty domestic politics. And that was my big failure in the days after 9/11 and in the run-up to Iraq, was thinking that our leadership was worthy of our steel as a people. And I'd still do it again. As Scott said, you're in the moment and you make the best decisions you can, but I can't tell you just how wrong I was about the continuing failure of leadership in Washington.
That's precisely it. That's precisely correct. I couldn't agree with you more. Looking back on the situation in Iraq, the surge came very late, and it took an awful lot of
Two
dead
wasted
Americans
years.
before that policy changed. But we could have simply scampered away as we did in Vietnam, and we didn't. And the surge stabilized things to a very high degree. And then, as soon as Barack Obama was elected, the Democrats, having run on the failure of the Iraq War and that the entire Iraq War as a catastrophe, they basically gave away the peace, and that was not something I'd ever considered possible. And so now when I think about U.S. military involvement, I think about if we were fighting World War II now, I'd be thinking about, well, when the left gets reelected, it's just a matter of time before, everything that we accomplished is gone. I agree about Afghanistan. Afghanistan is an anti-terrorism. We should not be fighting an anti-insurgency movement in Afghanistan. We just need to go over there and mow the grass. And since it is essentially not a state, and since it's so close to Pakistan, which is a state and which is a very sophisticated intelligence service who does not particularly care for us or any of the other things out there, if we have to go in there and mow the lawn with air power, then that's what we do, I think. I would like to say one thing about Iraq based on the fact that this is 9/11. The thing I remember most about 9/11 was that the world had changed and now we were going to be fighting at home. I thought, and I think most of us thought, that if you'd asked us what's going to happen in the next 17 years, I thought we would be seeing a series of these very large and increasingly large terrorist attacks. I certainly remember that for the first 3 or 4 years after 9/11, I could never watch a Thanksgiving Day parade or the ball drop in New York City or the Super Bowl without steeling myself for an explosion and 20,000 people killed or more. There's two reasons why that didn't happen, I think. The first reason it didn't happen is because of the quality of the people that we employ in agencies like the FBI and the NSA, both of which were horribly tarnished by Barack Obama's weaponization of the government. I think James Comey did more damage to the FBI than any combination of foreign forces have or could possibly do. But the actual agents in all of these branches are foiling plots almost every day. And because they don't happen, we assume that they're not there. And so we think that the world is safer and what's all the fuss about. No, that we're still here without having had a major attack since 9/11 because of the incredible work of people working in very dark and lonely places, tracking down threads and languages that they may not have been born into, and never, ever giving up, because the terrorists only have to succeed once. The FBI and the NSA and CIA, they have to succeed every day. So I wanted to give them certainly the credit for that. They certainly deserve it. But the one thing that never gets mentioned in all of this is what I think is the main reason we didn't see al-Qaeda continuing to ravage this country. I was hoping for a democratic Iraq. I was hoping for the kind of Iraq that we thought it could be. I was disappointed there. Looking back on it, I may have been naive in that expectation, that democracy is something that everybody wants and you can just simply give them an opportunity for it. I hadn't counted on all of the sectarian violence. I hadn't counted on Iraq putting Islamic law into their constitution, and so on and so on and so on. So I'm certainly disappointed about that. But here's the one thing I'm not disappointed in, and this is the single salient point to me of the 17 years since that day. When the towers came down, Al-Qaeda was an international organization with international reach. It had tens of thousands of jihadis under its direct control, being trained all around the world. And this army, led by Osama bin Laden, was going to be unleashed on the United States, and it didn't get here. And the reason it didn't get here, in my opinion, is because most of those jihadi warfighters are dead, and they're buried in the sands, not of Afghanistan, but in Iraq.
That's right.
This is the flypaper argument. We did not find the weapons of mass destruction. If we know he used them because we have pictures of dead Kurds dead from poison gas. So that argument never particularly shook me or moved me much. But this one does. We don't know how many exactly we killed. I've heard numbers from 40,000 to 80,000 Al-Qaeda fatalities in Iraq that we achieved at the cost of 4,000 or 5,000 Americans, 4,000 in Iraq and more in Afghanistan. We were defeating these people on a level of something like 70 to 1 in Fallujah, in their backyards, in their home terrain, with their booby traps. And the United States military went out and, over the course of several years, destroyed Al-Qaeda, killed them all. And we know this is true, not because I think it's true or I want to think it's true. We know it's true because we've intercepted the communications of guys like I cannot remember his name.
Zawahiri. Zawahiri.
Not the number two guy, Zarqawi. I think the guy
Okay.
who was in charge of Al-Qaeda Iraq, who had a wake-up call from a couple of 500-pound bombs in 2005. But basically, as the Iraq War started and continued, and the insurgency continued, there's an endless stream of messages from Al-Qaeda in Iraq to Osama bin Laden saying, send more guys, essentially saying, you told us in American we're a bunch of, Burgundy sipping hot tub, decadent, losers, and here come these Wu-Tang clan playing sons of bees who are 6'5" and they're kicking our ass. And so they did send more. Osama bin Laden thought Iraq was going to be the Vietnam that was going to end America. Turned out that Iraq was the Vietnam that ended Al-Qaeda. And when Al-Qaeda's remnants raised their heads under periods of laxity, under Barack Obama, ISIS became a major player, and then suddenly you have a Republican president, and they're gone too. This idea that you can't kill these terrorists because it just makes more of them is as stupid as the idea of saying, well, there's no reason to fight World War II. If we go and bomb Nazis and kill Nazis, all we'll do is make more Nazis. No, turns out no. So here's what I just wanted to close with. Could there have been a better 6,210 days? Could America have done better in the last 6,210 days? There is no question that is true. There's absolutely no question that there are a number of things that we did that were very serious mistakes that could have been corrected and maybe should have been corrected. But the thing I'd like to leave you with today is that after 6,210 days, things could have been immeasurably worse. Immeasurably worse. Yeah. Dirty bombs in Times Square, American people terrified to travel in their own country, shoot-ups in malls where an entire army of people going with AK-47s, and the moral price of then having, reprisals against the American Muslim population. None of this happened. None of it did. And I think mostly for the reasons I stated, but for whatever reason, yes, it could have gone better, but my God, it could have been worse. And if you'd asked me on that Tuesday evening if the next 17 years were going to go without another terrorist attack of any size, I would have just said there's just no way that's possible. And somebody deserves some credit for that. And that somebody is us. That'll do it for this edition of Right Angle, made possible by the paying members of BillWhittle.com. It's a pleasure to be able to speak our minds in a free country, no matter how hard they try. We say what we want to say, and we work for a very small number of people, and they allow us to basically keep seeing what we see and saying what we say. So thank you again for the members. We'll see you next week on Right Angle.